I was reading a sermon by Daniel Bennett on the passage that we're going to be talking about today. And he tells a story about going to a snack shop with his 5-year-old daughter. I don't know how many children he has, but on his days off, he takes turn taking the kids on a daddy date. And so this particular time, he's with his 5-year-old daughter, and they're at a snack shop in a sporting goods store. That was what she wanted to do. She wanted to go to this snack shop and have something there. Well, again, 5 years old, and they go, and in the snack shop there is this display case of all the candy and all the snacks and stuff. And so she comes to the first thing in the case, and she says, "Daddy, what is this?" And he explains, these are Skittles. And then she says, "Is it good?" And then he talks about, his opinion of this particular candy. And then she would say, "How much does it cost?" And then he would give the price. And then they would go to the next. She would go to the next item, and she would say, "What is this?" It's a Hershey's candy bar or something. Is it good? And that's his favorite candy bar. So he says, "Yeah, this is God's gift to humanity." And then she said, "Oh, how much does it cost?" And they went through the whole line of things, and he was getting a little exasperated. But finally, they came to the end, and he was trying to assure her that, "Daddy, it's okay. I'm paying for it. You don't need to be concerned about it," and so on. Well, come to find out, when he got home, he was talking to his wife about this, about what happened, and she said, "Oh, I know why she did that, because she has $2 to her name, and so she's always thinking about, what can I get for $2? What's the best thing that I can get with my $2, right?" Isn't it interesting how we truly measure the value of things by what we will give up in order to obtain them? If she's going to give up this precious $2, she wants the very best thing that she can possibly get, right? In the story today, Jesus presents a very high view of discipleship, and some may be or have been inclined to ask, why it's so costly? Why does this cost so much? Well, it's because Jesus is everything, and Jesus has everything, and he is worth everything. We are in Sermon 11 in our series, The Road to Redemption, and talking today about the cost of discipleship. The chapter is number 14 of Luke. Let me read the passage for us, starting in verse 25. "Now, large crowds were accompanying Jesus, and turning to them, he said, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, and wife and children, and brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't sit down first and compute the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish the tower, all who see it will begin to make fun of him. They will say, 'This man began to build and he's not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to confront another king in battle, will not sit down first and determine whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who is coming against him with 20,000? If he cannot succeed, he will send a representative while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. In the same way, therefore, not one of you can be my disciple if he does not renounce all of his own possessions. Salt is good, but if salt loses its flavor, how can its flavor be restored? It is of no value for the soil or for the manure pile. It is to be thrown out. The one who has ears to hear had better listen." Today we're talking about this idea that true discipleship always leads to Christ. True discipleship always leads to Jesus. 3 ways we're going to talk about that. Number 1, be devoted to Christ. 2, declare your need. And 3, depend on Christ. Be devoted, declare your need, depend on Christ. The very first verse of this passage shows us that there were many people following Christ. There were many people that were around. A huge crowd gathered. But they were not really following him in the sense of learning from him. They simply wanted to benefit from his ministry. Maybe they wanted to be fed again. Or maybe they had a friend who needed to be healed. Or they were coming just for the show. Hey, whoa, this is a really cool guy. But they really weren't there to be a learner of Jesus, an actual disciple of Jesus. So what does Jesus do? He raises the requirement out of their reach. Discipleship, with me as the learner and Jesus as the teacher, actually begins before salvation. And that's what we're seeing here. Understood properly, the teaching leads me to Christ as my supply, and the cross as my life, and grace as my only hope. Friend, if you've never learned anything about Jesus, this word today is for you. Brother, sister, if you belong to God and have been a disciple of Jesus for any number of years, this message is for you too. True discipleship always leads us to Christ. How? Well, first, be fully devoted to Christ. The word that Luke uses, or that Jesus used this day, he said, hate your family. Here's the verses 25 and 26 again. Now, large crowds were accompanying Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Right? Now, is Jesus really talking about hate? The word for hate here is, it's hyperbole, and it's used in kind of a relative sense. Here are a couple of other examples from the Old Testament. Some of you may remember the story of Esau and Jacob. Well, there's a point in the Old Testament where God says, Jacob have I loved, and Esau I have hated. Did God really hate Esau? I don't believe so, but in comparison to how much he loved Jacob and how much he favored Jacob, Esau was unloved, or not loved nearly as much. We see the same idea too with Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Leah and Rachel were the 2 sisters that Jacob married, and that's a whole nother story. Rachel was the favorite wife, but Leah was unloved. She wasn't hated, but in comparison to Jacob's love for Rachel, Leah was loved far less. And so what is Jesus saying here? Well, one Bible commentator, Bob Utley, says, in the Near East, commitment to family superseded every other commitment. Jesus must become a person's top priority. I think maybe you see that in your culture a little bit, depending on what culture you're from. Certainly in northern Iraq, we see a very strong commitment to family and commitment to the family group and the tribe. Here's how Matthew says it, or Jesus said it actually in the book of Matthew, chapter 10. He said, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, Jesus said. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Hate your family. and hate your own life. The last phrase, even hate even your own life. The word for life there is sukas, which means soul, your soul. And that's the real you. That's the real me inside this body. Again, hate is being used in a relative way here. I must love Jesus far more than I love myself. And he's not teaching me to hate myself. No, we love ourselves, we love our enemy, we love our family. But our love for Jesus, our loyalty to Jesus should be far, far more. The questions are, who am I loyal to, right? Who has priority over any and every area of my life? Have you ever heard someone say, I'm just trying to find myself. I need to go find myself. Maybe that's not used quite so much in the same way anymore as it was some years ago. Jesus teaches that whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life because of me will find it. So, who is speaking into your life? Who are you following? Who has the most influence over you? Such loyalty, such allegiance actually begins before salvation. How else will I come to the point of trusting him with my whole life? I'm much more than a curious onlooker coming to Jesus for bread or healing or a fun experience. I come to the point where I commit myself to him as my only teacher, the only voice I'm going to listen to. And then as I begin to consider truth and take it into my life, I feel more and more drawn to him. This is all impossible without the work of God's Holy Spirit. His job is to reveal Christ and to glorify God. This is the reason why I say to my unsaved friends, hey, you need to get to know Jesus. You just need to get to know Jesus and find out who he is. Read everything that he ever taught and said. Be devoted to Christ. Because true discipleship always leads to Christ. The second point, though, is to declare your need. Jesus said, whoever does not carry his own cross cannot be my disciple. This is said before Christ carried his own cross and died on the cross. So what is he talking about here precisely? Well, the traditional understanding, and something I've taught and preached before, is that carry your cross means to deny your thoughts, deny your desires, deny yourself, deny your responses and dreams and goals and solutions and so on. Well, we do know that the cross was a way that the Romans executed people. One of the ways that they did that, and it's probably the most torturous way. But the cross is a symbol of death and execution, and it symbolizes a curse. But let's try to understand this before Christ's death on the cross. So in Matthew and Mark, when they talk about carrying your cross, they also talk about, right beside it, they talk about deny yourself and carry your cross. Deny yourself, take up your cross. So it's unlikely that they have the exact same meaning. If I am carrying my cross in a Roman culture, then I have been tried and found guilty of a crime deserving of death. I have been condemned to die. Could it be that this is not about self-denial, but about admitting my guilt, admitting that I'm a dead man walking? Who was in the crowd that day? We don't know for sure, but it was a large crowd. It's likely that the most religious were there and the least religious. It's probable that there were people there from every level of society: lawyers, fishermen, housewives, boys and girls, farmers, tax collectors. mostly Jews and some Gentiles, perhaps. But the Jews were a very proud people. They believed that they were special and holy, and that's why God chose them. Especially in light of the Romans, who were their conquerors and their enemies, they viewed themselves as the innocent victims and worthy of God's help and favor. When Jesus said to carry their cross, I think he was saying to them, admit that you are guilty, that you have been condemned to death because of your sin. Whoa! What a slap in the face to a Jewish person. What a hard word to hear. This is probably why the majority of them would have responded, hey, it's not me, it's not us, it's them. What sort of teacher is this? He demands that we love him above everyone else. He demands that we admit that we're worthy of death. This is not the sort of teacher I will follow. This is impossible. What does it mean for us to carry our cross? As we can kind of think about that from this context. The good news for us here and now is that Jesus carried his own cross and he was sacrificed on it. A perfect, one-time for all time sacrifice needed to be made because we are all sinners. We have all fallen short of God's glory. For us, carrying our cross in the sense of Luke 14 is agreeing with God that we are sinners, that we've been sentenced to death with no hope of life without him. You see, Jesus is not interested in a whole bunch of followers. He wants genuine learners. So instead of making it easier for people to follow him, he's making it a lot harder. True discipleship always leads us to Christ. The third point is to depend on Christ. And here's where I get that. The verse that says, whoever does not follow me cannot be my disciple. To follow a rabbi or a teacher meant to depend on that teacher. You basically cast yourself on that teacher and look to that teacher to provide and teach in every way. Then Jesus quickly goes to two illustrations about the importance of calculating the cost. How do we talk about the cost of this following, this discipleship? The first is from the field of construction. He says, for which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't sit down first and compute the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish the tower, all who see it will begin to make fun of him. They will say, this man began to build and was not able to finish. What a fool. So the call for us is to stop and think this all through. The goal for this man is to finish the project that he started. And failure to finish his building leads to shame, which was awful. The worst thing in that culture, you make a fool of yourself. His question, can I afford to finish this well? No, I don't have the money to finish this well, so I won't go. Or I have the money, and I will finish this project, and it will be great. The question to you and to me is, can I afford to follow Jesus? Well, the answer is actually no, I can't afford it. But he has provided my resources. He's the one who's going to provide for me because he is my teacher and my rabbi. The second illustration he uses is from the battle. What king going out to confront another king in battle will not sit down first and to determine whether he's able with 10,000 to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he cannot succeed, he will send a representative while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. His question, can I afford to refuse these demands for peace? No, I can't afford it because I don't have the men. I'll be defeated. I have to make peace. And so I can't afford to refuse. But I think your question and my question is, can I afford to refuse Jesus? I can't afford to refuse Jesus. But I don't. But I shouldn't worry because he, again, will provide all that is needed. And then Jesus said, in the same way, therefore, not one of you can be my disciple if he does not renounce all of his own possessions. So here's the thing. We are stewards. We have nothing of our own. But it's not obedience that's the key in this picture. It's dependence. Dependence is the key element of discipleship. We are only capable of depending on our teacher for all that we are and all that we have. We have no resources in and of ourselves to actually follow Jesus and be learners of him. True discipleship always leads us to Christ. There are two things happening here as we come to a close. Two things happening. First, amazingly, Jesus is thinning the crowd. The crowd is huge. He wants a smaller crowd. He's looking for only those who really want to learn from him. And so he's setting the bar high, higher than it's ever been. Actually, verses 34 and 35 are kind of the final straw to break this camel's back. He says, salt is good, but if salt loses its flavor, how can its flavor be restored? It is of no value for the soil or for the manure pile. It is to be thrown out. Many preachers and writers over the years have talked about the benefits of salt, because in various places Jesus has said something like this, even the phrase, you are the salt of the earth, and so on. Salt, good for flavor, good for the soil in a certain amount. In a sense, good for fertilizer, good for preservation, good for... In fact, it was used in every Jewish sacrifice, which I think is also significant. But I think that in this context of pre-Christian discipleship, that salt equals a 100% commitment to the truth, a pure commitment to the pure truth. Jesus is saying here, I believe, I'm giving you the pure truth here. Don't water down this message. If you let it go, or if you try to mix it with other messages, I will no longer be your primary influence. You will not be led to me as your source of life. You will be led instead to just religion. You'll instead be led to a list of do's and don'ts. And the vast majority of the people, they didn't want to hear any of that. What? Hate my family and myself? Admit my death sentence? Declare my inadequacy? I could never do that. So the majority of the people that day, they likely didn't have ears to hear what Jesus was saying. But Jesus was setting them up. He was setting them up. They and we could never reach God in the first place. And the way Jesus is talking, it's absolutely out of the question in and of ourselves. But there is a way. Jesus is leading the people to his cross. And that's the second thing happening here. Bob Deffinbaugh says this: discipleship is not a matter of how much we have to offer, but of renouncing all that we think we have to offer. To be his disciples, we do not bring anything to him. To prove our commitment and worthiness, we leave all behind, trusting only on Him and on His faithful provision for all that we need to do what He calls us to do. This is true discipleship. Discipleship, like salvation, begins by recognizing the high price required and that we are unable to meet it, and thus coming to Christ empty-handed, looking to Him to do what we cannot. As we bring the good news to friends and family and our neighbor across the street or across the city, let's not be afraid to tell the whole story. Every one of us needs to come to Jesus the same way. He draws us by His Spirit. We completely devote ourselves to His influence, and He continues to draw us. We confess our desperate need for Him, and He begins to provide for us. And then we realize our need to depend on Him for everything that we are and all that we have. Then we spend the rest of our lives thanking Him for such a gift. God bless you.